"It's a shame," one nurse says, her voice a low murmur in the sterile quiet of the hospital corridor. She owns half the city, but there's not a single soul on her visitors list. No family, no friends. The other nurse sighs, shaking her head. All the money in the world can't buy you a kidney. Without a donor, she won't see the end of the month. The words drifted down the hall and found Elias Grand, slumped in a rigid plastic chair just out of sight. His heart was a frantic drum against his ribs, but not for the stranger in the private suite. His entire world was in a room just down the hall, a small, 7-year-old world that had woken up an hour ago, breathless and terrified. Mia. He could still hear the awful, high-pitched wheezing, see the panic in her wide blue eyes as she fought for every scrap of air. He'd scooped her up, his own breath catching in his throat, and driven faster than he ever had in his life, the city lights blurring into streaks of fear. Now she was in an examination room, hooked up to a nebulizer, and he was left here to wait, trapped in the chilling silence between her gasping breaths and a doctor's verdict. The nurse's words about the lonely dying woman barely registered at first, just background noise in the symphony of his own anxiety. But then they settled deep inside him, a chilling echo of a loneliness he knew all too well. He remembered the final months with his wife Chloe, the endless hospital stays, the hushed conversations between doctors, the way friends slowly stopped visiting, unsure of what to say. In the end, it had just been him and her, holding hands in a room that smelled of antiseptic and fading hope. The thought of someone facing that same end, but completely, utterly alone, sent a shiver through him. He pushed the thought away, focusing on the rhythmic beep of a machine somewhere down the hall. He was a janitor. He had just started a new job cleaning the gleaming, soulless headquarters of Kincaid Innovations, a global tech empire. It was a night shift, which meant he could be home during the day for Mia. The pay was decent, enough to keep their small apartment, to buy Mia's art supplies, and, most importantly, to afford the expensive medications for her chronic asthma. His life was a carefully constructed fortress built to protect his daughter. There was no room for anything else, no room for strangers. A doctor appeared, his face etched with professional calm. "Mr. Grand?" Elias shot to his feet, his hands clenched. "Is she okay?" "Her oxygen levels are stabilizing," the doctor said, offering a small, reassuring smile. "The attack was severe, but the treatment is working. We'd like to keep her overnight for observation, just to be safe." Relief washed over Elias so intensely his knees felt weak. He leaned against the wall, nodding. "Yes, of course. Whatever she needs. You can see her in a few minutes. We're just getting her settled in a room." As the doctor walked away, Elias let out a breath he didn't realize he'd been holding for the past hour. He sank back into the chair, his body trembling. He was so focused on Mia that he didn't notice the two nurses from before walked past him. They were pushing an empty gurney, their conversation now a little louder. "Suite 7B. They say she built that company from the ground up after her parents died. A genius, but a ghost. No one ever sees her. Well, unless a miracle happens, no one will again." The words hit him differently this time, not as an echo, but as a direct strike. He looked down the long, polished corridor toward the private wing. Suite 7B. He pictured a vast, empty room, a single figure lying in a bed, surrounded by machines that only measured the slow march toward the inevitable. No hand to hold, no one to whisper words of comfort. The image was unbearable. He thought of Mia, of how he would tear the world apart for her. What if she had no one? He didn't know why he was doing it. It was an impulse, a pull from somewhere deep inside him that he couldn't explain or ignore. He stood up and walked toward the main nurse's station, his footsteps echoing in the quiet hall. A woman with kind eyes looked up from a computer screen. "Can I help you?" Elias cleared his throat, his voice feeling rusty. I overheard something. The patient in Suite 7B, the one who needs a kidney. The nurse's expression softened with pity. Yes, it's a very sad situation. You said she doesn't have a donor. It wasn't a question. No family that we know of. Her blood type is rare. Finding a match on the National Registry in time. It's unlikely. Elias's own blood was O negative. The universal donor. Chloe used to joke that it was because he'd give the shirt off his back to anyone. He took a breath, the words forming before he had a chance to second-guess them. What if I wanted to see if I was a match? The nurse blinked, surprised. You, sir? Do you know the patient? No, I've never met her. He saw the confusion in her eyes and rushed to explain, though he wasn't sure he understood it himself. It's just, no one should have to go through that alone. Her professional demeanor melted away, replaced by a look of genuine warmth. That's an incredibly generous thought, Mr. Grand. Elias Grand. Well, Mr. Grand, let me get you some information. The process for anonymous living donation is quite thorough. There are tests, evaluations. I want to do it, he said, the certainty in his own voice surprising him. I want to take the tests. He spent the next hour filling out forms and giving blood samples, his mind a whirlwind. This was insane. He had a daughter to think about. He had a new job. He couldn't afford to be out of commission for a major surgery. But every time he thought of backing out, the image of that empty room, of that solitary figure, returned. Later, sitting by Mia's bedside, he watched her sleep, her breathing finally even and peaceful, a small stuffed bear clutched in her arms. Her sketchbook lay on the bedside table, open to a drawing of a field of daisies under a smiling sun. He picked it up, tracing the crayon lines with his finger. Chloe had loved daisies. After she was gone, Mia started drawing them everywhere. It was her way of keeping her mother close. On his wrist, hidden beneath his watch, was a faded tattoo of a single daisy, something he and Chloe had gotten together on a whim years ago. He looked from the drawing to his sleeping daughter. He was doing this for a stranger, but somehow it felt like he was doing it for them too. It was a fight against the same cruel randomness that had taken his wife, a defiant stand against the loneliness that haunted the quiet corners of the world. He didn't know the name of the woman in Suite 7B, and he didn't want to. She was just a person who needed help, and he was a person who could give it. It was as simple and as complicated as that. The call came 2 days later. Elias was in the small kitchen of their apartment, carefully cutting the crusts off a sandwich for Mia's lunch, when his phone buzzed on the counter. It was an unknown number, but he had a sinking, certain feeling he knew who it was. He wiped his hands on a towel and answered. Mr. Grand? This is Helen from the hospital's transplant coordination office. Her voice was calm and professional. We have the results of your preliminary tests. Elias's knuckles went white as he gripped the counter. He glanced over at Mia, who was sitting at the table, humming to herself as she colored in her daisy sketchbook. And there was a slight pause. You're a match, Mr. Grand. A perfect match, in fact. It's quite rare. The words seemed to suck the air from the room. A perfect match. It was no longer a hypothetical act of kindness. It was real. It was a choice sitting right in front of him, heavy and undeniable. He thought of the risks, the recovery time, the possibility of complications. He was all Mia had. If something happened to him. Mr. Grand, are you still there? He swallowed hard, his gaze fixed on his daughter. She looked up and gave him a bright, gap-toothed smile. That was his answer. I'm here, he said, his voice steadier than he felt. What's the next step? Far above the city, in a corner suite on the 7th floor of that same hospital, Harper Kincaid stared out a panoramic window. The view was breathtaking. A sprawling tapestry of steel and glass that represented her world, her empire. She could see the gleaming spire of the Kincaid Innovations building, a monument to her success. From here, it looked like a toy. She felt like a prisoner, tethered to an IV pole and a dialysis machine that hummed a constant, mocking rhythm of her own failure. Her doctor, a man with a tired face and patient eyes, entered the room holding a tablet. "Good morning, Harper. How are we feeling?" "Like I'm running a multi-billion-dollar company from a bedpan," she clipped, not turning from the window. "Get to the point, David. Are you here to tell me my creatinine levels have reached a new, exciting high?" Dr. Evans sighed. He was used to her sharp, defensive tongue. It was the armor she wore to hide her terror. "Actually, I'm here to tell you we may have some good news." Harper finally turned, her eyebrow arched in disbelief. "Good news? Don't tell me the cafeteria has added a new flavor of gelatin." I might not be able to contain my excitement. "We've found a donor." The sarcasm vanished from her face, replaced by a stark, naked shock. She stared at him, her lips slightly parted. "What did you say?" "A living donor came forward 2 days ago. We ran the tests. The cross-matching results just came in. Harper, it's a perfect match. I've never seen anything like it outside of identical twins." Harper sank back against her pillows, her mind struggling to process the information. A donor. Out of nowhere. It didn't make sense. Her entire life was a series of calculated transactions, of assets and liabilities. A gift of this magnitude, from a stranger, did not compute. It had to be a mistake, or a trap. "Who is it?" she demanded, her voice sharp with suspicion. "What do they want? Money? A job? A seat on the board? Find out what their price is." Dr. Evans shook his head slowly. "That's the thing. They don't want anything. The donation is completely anonymous and altruistic. They don't even know who you are. All they know is that someone in this room needed help." Harper stared at him. Speechless. Anonymous. Altruistic. The words felt foreign, like a language she'd never learned. For the first time in a very long time, she was confronted with a variable she could not control, quantify, or comprehend. And it terrified her more than the illness itself. The surgery was scheduled for the following Tuesday. Elias had to arrange everything with a quiet, methodical precision that belied the frantic state of his own mind. He asked their neighbor, a kind, elderly woman named Mrs. Gable, if she could watch Mia for 2 days. He told her he was having a minor hernia repair, a lie that felt like a stone in his gut. The hardest part was requesting the time off. He stood before his supervisor, a burly man named Sal, in the basement-level facilities office of the Kincaid Innovations building. The irony was a bitter taste in his mouth. He was about to save the life of the woman who owned this entire skyscraper, and he had to stand here, heart pounding, hoping he wouldn't lose his job over it. "I need to request a week off," Elias said, keeping his voice even. "Medical leave." Sal grunted, looking up from a stack of paperwork. "A week?" "You just started, Grand. Everything okay?" "It's a minor procedure. It was pre-scheduled, but the date got moved up. I have a doctor's note." He slid the generic document across the desk, the one Helen from the transplant office had provided. It mentioned a planned surgical procedure, but gave no details. Sal scanned it, his eyes lingering for a moment before he shrugged. "All right, a week. But I need you back on your feet by next Wednesday. No excuses. This place doesn't clean itself." "I'll be here," Elias promised, relief making him feel lightheaded. That night, he tucked Mia into bed, lingering longer than usual. He smoothed her hair back from her forehead, memorizing the curve of her cheek, the soft flutter of her eyelashes against her skin. "Why are you looking at me funny, Daddy?" she murmured, her eyes half closed. He smiled, his throat tight. "I'm just looking at my favorite person in the whole world." "I love you," she whispered, already drifting into sleep. "I love you more," he said, his voice cracking. He leaned down and kissed her forehead, a silent promise to come back to her, whole and safe. He walked out of her room and stood for a long time by the window in their small living room, looking out at the city lights. One of those lights was in a hospital, in Suite 7B. A stranger was waiting, and he, A janitor who polished the floors of her kingdom was about to give her the gift of a sunrise she wasn't supposed to see. The morning of the surgery, the hospital was a world of pale blues and hushed efficiency. In a small standard room, Elias sat on the edge of the bed, a thin gown doing little to ward off the chill. A nurse with a warm smile and steady hands prepped an IV line for his arm. "You're doing a brave thing, Mr. Grand," she said softly, her voice a small anchor in his sea of nerves. "A truly remarkable thing." Elias offered a weak smile, his eyes fixed on the daisy tattoo on his wrist. It was the only part of him that felt familiar in this sterile environment. Just trying to help. His thoughts were miles away, in Mrs. Gable's cozy apartment, where Mia was probably eating pancakes and watching cartoons, completely unaware of the chasm her father was about to cross. He had called her just an hour ago, his voice tight, telling her he loved her and that he'd see her very soon. "Don't you worry," the nurse said, patting his hand. "We'll take good care of you." 7 floors up, in Suite 7B, the atmosphere was entirely different. A team of specialists moved around Harper Kincaid's bed with a focused intensity reserved for VIPs. She was sharp and impatient, barking questions about surgical timelines and recovery protocols, her mind treating the life-altering procedure like a hostile corporate merger that had to be controlled. But underneath the armor of her commands, her hands trembled slightly as she smoothed the blanket over her lap. She was about to let a part of a stranger into her body, a piece of a person she had never met, who wanted nothing from her. The concept was so alien, so deeply illogical, that it felt like a violation. Who were they? A man? A woman? What kind of person just gave away a piece of themselves and walked away? The sheer, irrational kindness of it was a puzzle her brilliant mind couldn't solve, and it was driving her mad. As they began to wheel her bed out of the room, she closed her eyes. She wasn't thinking about her company or her fortune. She was thinking about a faceless ghost in another room, and for the first time, she whispered a word she hadn't used in years. "Please." The dual surgeries took nearly 6 hours. In the intricate, silent dance of the operating theater, one life was passed from a janitor to a billionaire, an anonymous gift delivered by scalpel and suture. Elias woke to a deep, throbbing ache in his side. It was a raw, insistent pain that made every breath a conscious effort. A blurry figure in scrubs swam into view. He blinked, his throat dry and scratchy. "Mia," he croaked, the name a reflex. "Is she?" "Your daughter is fine, Mr. Grand." The nurse's voice was gentle. "Your neighbor called a little while ago. She's watching a movie and eating popcorn relief, potent and immediate, flooded his system, a more powerful anesthetic than the morphine dripping into his veins. The pain didn't matter. Mia was safe. That was all that mattered." He closed his eyes, his body heavy but his heart a little lighter. He had done it. Harper's return to consciousness was slower, more disorienting. She surfaced from a deep, dreamless fog, not to pain, but to a strange and unfamiliar sensation. Quiet. The violent hum of the dialysis machine was gone. The frantic, exhausted thrum of her own body fighting itself had ceased. She took a breath, a real one, that filled her lungs without a struggle. It felt clean. She slowly opened her eyes. The light in the room seemed brighter. The beeping of the monitor beside her was steady, strong, a rhythm of life, not a countdown to death. She was alive, truly, fully alive. And it was all thanks to a ghost. 2 days later, the fog had completely cleared, replaced by an ironclad resolve. As Dr. Evans checked her vitals, she looked at him with an intensity that made him uneasy. "I want to know who it was," she said. It wasn't a request. "Harper, I've told you. The donor's identity is sealed." "It was their one and only condition. Sealed can be unsealed," she retorted. "I want a name, David." "I can't give you one." Her jaw tightened. "Fine." She reached for her phone on the bedside table. She dialed a number she knew by heart. A man with a calm, discreet voice answered on the first ring. "Fletcher," she said, her voice low and commanding. "I have a job for you. I want you to find someone. There are no official records. They were a patient here, discharged today or tomorrow. An anonymous kidney donor. Blood type O, negative. I want to know everything, do you understand?" "Perfectly, Miss Kincaid," the voice replied without hesitation. "Consider it done." She hung up, a sense of control finally returning. She would find them. She would drag her ghost out into the light and force this impossible situation to make sense. Meanwhile, 3 floors down, Elias was already on his feet, shuffling painfully down the hallway, ignoring a nurse's plea to get back in bed. He had one goal: go home. He had spoken to Mia on the phone, her cheerful, innocent voice a painful reminder of how much he hated being away from her. He couldn't stand another night in this place. He was discharged the next morning. While Harper Kincaid was orchestrating a high-level private investigation from her luxury suite, Elias Grand, dressed in worn jeans and a faded hoodie, signed his papers, nodded a thank you to the staff, and walked slowly out the hospital's main entrance. He winced as he stepped into the bright sunlight, his hand instinctively going to the tender, bandaged area on his side. He was just another person in the bustling city, a man with a secret ache, heading home to his little girl. The ghost had vanished. The moment Elias opened the apartment door, a small missile of pigtails and pink pajamas launched itself at his legs. "Daddy!" Mia's shriek of pure joy was the best sound he had ever heard. He grunted, a sharp, involuntary gasp of pain shooting through his side as she hugged him tight. He quickly masked it with a laugh, scooping her up into his arms, hissing slightly as the stitches pulled. He buried his face in her hair, which smelled like bubblegum shampoo and home. "Hey, my little Mia bear," he murmured, holding her close. "Did you miss me?" "So much. Mrs. Gable let me have ice cream for breakfast, and we watched the movie with the singing squirrel 3 times. 3 times? That sounds like torture," he joked, setting her down gently. Mrs. Gable bustled out from the kitchen, wiping her hands on her apron. "Welcome home, dear. How are you feeling? You're looking a bit pale." "Just tired," Elias lied smoothly. "The doctor said I need to take it easy for a week or so." No heavy lifting. Mia's eyes grew wide with concern. "Does it hurt, Daddy?" He forced his most reassuring smile. "Nah, just a little sore. Nothing your dad can't handle." But as he walked toward the sofa, every step was a careful, calculated negotiation with the fire burning in his side. He had done it. He was home. But the cost of his secret was a debt his body was now collecting. Harper Kincaid was not used to the word no. She paced the length of her hospital suite, a silk robe tied tightly around her waist, her phone pressed to her ear. On the other end, Fletcher's calm, methodical voice was beginning to sound like a drill on a raw nerve. "The hospital's privacy protocols are airtight, Miss Kincaid," he was saying. "They've logged every inquiry. There is no official way to get the donor's name. I've reviewed the security footage from the past week. Dozens of people came and went from the donation wing. Without a face, it's a needle in a global haystack." "I don't pay you for haystacks, Fletcher," Harper snapped. "I pay you for needles." "What do you have?" "A blood type and a single anecdotal note from a pre-op nurse. She described the donor as a man, quiet, seemed to be in his 30s. He said he was doing it because no one should have to go through that alone." Harper stopped pacing, the words hitting her with unexpected force. No one should have to go through that alone. It was a simple sentiment, but it hinted at a depth of empathy she couldn't fathom. It wasn't about money or power. It was about humanity. The thought was so foreign, it made her feel dizzy. "Find him, Fletcher," she said, her voice softer now, but no less determined. "I don't care what it takes. Find that man." A week after the surgery, Elias was back in his blue janitor's uniform, the starchy fabric chafing against the still tender incision. Sal had been true to his word. He expected Elias back on the floor. No excuses. The first few hours of his shift were a special kind of hell. Pushing the heavy cart of supplies felt like dragging a boulder. Bending down to empty a trash can sent a jolt of agony up his side. He worked through a haze of pain, his movements slow and deliberate, a grim smile fixed on his face for anyone who passed by. He couldn't afford to look weak. He couldn't afford to lose this job. Mia's face was a constant image in his mind, the only thing that kept him moving. Harper was discharged 2 days after her call with Fletcher. She returned to her penthouse, a sprawling, minimalist space with panoramic views of a city she no longer felt connected to. The silence was deafening. Before, she had thrived in it. Now it felt like a tomb. She couldn't sleep. She couldn't work. The ghost of her donor haunted every quiet moment. That night, an unfamiliar restlessness propelled her out of her apartment. She had her driver take her to the Kincaid Innovations building. It was nearly midnight, the tower dark save for the emergency lights and the scattered glow from the janitorial staff's lamps. She swiped her access card and walked through the silent, marble lobby, her footsteps echoing in the cavernous space. She didn't know what she was looking for. She just walked. She took the elevator to the 40th floor, the executive level, and stepped out into the long carpeted corridor. The air was still and cool. At the far end of the hall, a single figure was methodically polishing the glass wall of a conference room, his back to her. Elias was so focused on the circular motion of his cloth, on breathing through the persistent ache in his side, that he didn't hear the elevator doors slide open. It was only a flicker of movement in his peripheral vision that made him pause. He glanced at the reflection in the glass. A woman, tall and elegant, was walking slowly down the center of the hallway. He recognized her instantly from the portraits in the lobby. Harper Kincaid, the queen of the castle. His blood ran cold. He quickly turned his back fully, lowering his head and polishing a spot on the glass with renewed, desperate focus. Be invisible. Just be a part of the background. She won't even see you. Harper walked past the conference room, her gaze distant, lost in her own thoughts. She was so consumed by the search for the man who saved her life that she didn't even glance at the janitor working just a few feet away. She gave a slight, almost imperceptible nod, a new, strange habit of acknowledging the few people she passed in her nightly wanderings. It was a gesture of a queen to a nameless subject. Then she was gone, her footsteps fading down the hall. Elias waited until he was sure she had turned a corner before he let out a shaky breath. He leaned his forehead against the cool glass, his heart hammering against his ribs. The woman whose life was now stitched to his, who was hunting for him with all her vast resources, had just passed within 10 feet of him, and she hadn't had a clue. The weeks following his return to work settled into a tense, painful routine for Elias. His body was slowly healing, the sharp, biting pain in his side dulling to a persistent, heavy ache. He learned how to move in ways that wouldn't pull at the stitches, how to lift with his legs, how to pace himself through the long, silent nights. More than the physical pain, though, was the constant, low-grade hum of anxiety. He saw Harper Kincaid 3 more times on her late-night patrols. She never spoke to him again after that first night, but her presence was a phantom that stalked the hallways, a reminder of the secret he carried. He kept his head down, his movements efficient, melting into the shadows whenever she appeared. He was a ghost in her kingdom, and that's exactly how he wanted to stay. Harper's nightly walks became her new ritual. She explored the building floor by floor, a queen rediscovering her own territory. She saw the intricate ecosystem that thrived in the darkness, the IT crews running diagnostics in the server rooms, the security teams monitoring their screens with quiet focus, the janitors moving like a silent, synchronized team, erasing the day's chaos and preparing the building for a new dawn. She had built this empire, but she had never truly seen it. She had only ever seen the view from the top. For the first time, she was seeing the foundation, and she felt a strange, unsettling flicker of respect. Her search for the donor, however, was a source of constant, mounting frustration. Fletcher met her in her stark white office, his expression grim. "It's a complete brick wall, Miss Kincaid," he said, sliding a thin folder onto her desk. It was mostly empty. "I've run background checks on every O-negative male in the city who had a hospital visit in that 2-week window. Nothing. I've interviewed hospital staff off the record. They're loyal, and they're scared of the legal repercussions. We can go public. A press release. A reward." Appeal to the person directly. Harper stared out the window, her back to him. "No," she said firmly. She turned to face him, her eyes clear and certain. The kind of man who says no one should go through that alone and then walks away doesn't want a press conference, Fletcher. He doesn't want a reward. A man like that doesn't want a stage. He wants silence. Her understanding of the ghost was becoming clearer, even as the person himself remained a mystery. It was the most infuriating puzzle she had ever faced. A few nights later, Elias was working on the 38th floor, cleaning the executive lounge. He was wiping down a long granite countertop when he heard the soft chime of the elevator. His muscles tensed. He glanced up to see Harper step out, her expression thoughtful and distant. She was heading in his direction. There was nowhere for him to go. He gripped his cleaning cloth, his knuckles white, and focused on his work. She stopped at a floor-to-ceiling window not far from where he was working, looking down at the river of headlights flowing through the city below. The silence stretched on for a long, heavy minute. "You keep this floor very clean," she said, her voice startling him. She hadn't turned to look at him. Her gaze was still fixed on the view. Elias swallowed, his throat suddenly dry. "Thank you, Miss Kincaid." "What's your name?" The question hit him like a physical blow. He froze. A name made him reel. A name could be investigated. "Elias, ma'am. Elias Grand." She nodded slowly, still not looking at him. "Elias." She said the name softly, as if testing its weight. Just as he was about to move away, to escape, his cleaning cart, which he had parked carelessly on a slight incline in the floor, began to roll. He lunged for it, a sharp, white-hot pain lancing through his side. He let out a choked gasp, his hand flying to the spot beneath his uniform. The cart bumped gently against a leather sofa and stopped. In the process, the flimsy latch on the cart's main supply door had popped open. Harper finally turned, her attention drawn by his sudden movement and the soft gasp of pain. Her eyes fell on him, hunched over slightly, his face pale under the fluorescent lights. Then her gaze dropped to the open door of his cart. Taped to the inside, illuminated by the hallway light, was a child's drawing. It was rendered in bright, waxy crayon on a piece of construction paper, carefully laminated with packing tape. It was a picture of a ridiculously cheerful sun smiling down on a field of white daisies. It was the most vibrant, human thing in the entire sterile corporate hallway. Elias saw where she was looking. Mortified, he quickly shut the door, the latch clicking loudly in the silence. "Sorry, ma'am." The wheels stick sometimes. Harper didn't say anything. She just stared at the spot where the drawing had been, her expression unreadable. For the first time, she wasn't looking at a janitor, a uniform, a functionary. She was looking at a man who clearly had a child, a man who winced in pain and carried a piece of his heart taped to the inside of a cleaning cart. He mumbled an apology and pushed his cart away, his heart pounding a terrified rhythm against his ribs. Harper stood by the window for a long time after he was gone. The image of the crayon daisies was burned into her mind. It was a glimpse into a life, a world, so completely removed from her own. It was nothing. A janitor's kid's drawing. It meant nothing. But later that night, as she sat in the silent darkness of her penthouse, her phone vibrated. It was Fletcher. "I'm sorry to call so late," he said, his voice tired. "It's probably nothing, Miss Kincaid. It feels like a dead end. But I finally got a source at the hospital to talk. A nurse from the pre-op wing. And?" Harper said, her voice flat. And she remembered one tiny detail about the donor. He was filling out the final consent forms, and he was nervous. She said he was doodling on the corner of the page while he waited for the doctor. Just a little scribble to keep his hands busy. Harper closed her eyes, a strange sense of dread and anticipation coiling in her stomach. "What did he draw, Fletcher?" "A flower." She said it was a simple, childish-looking drawing. "A daisy." The phone call ended, but Harper didn't move. She sat in the cavernous silence of her penthouse, the city lights glittering below like a galaxy she no longer belonged to. A daisy, a childish doodle on a consent form, a crayon drawing taped to the inside of a janitor's cart. It was a coincidence. It had to be. The world was full of daisies, full of children who drew them and fathers who cherished them. It was a ridiculous, impossible leap of logic. Her ghost, her selfless, extraordinary savior, couldn't be the quiet man who polished the floors. Life wasn't that poetic, that absurd. She ran a multi-billion-dollar corporation built on data, on probabilities, on cold, hard facts. And the facts were that this was a statistical anomaly, a meaningless fluke. But the image of his face, pale and strained as he grabbed his side in pain, returned to her. The raw, authentic flash of agony he had tried so desperately to hide. It was the look of someone recovering from something. The way he had shut the cart door, not just with haste, but with a flicker of panic in his eyes, as if she had seen a part of him he needed to keep hidden. Elias Grand. The name echoed in the silence. It was a simple, solid name, a name that belonged in a world of packed lunches and parent-teacher conferences, not in the rarefied air of her life. She stood up and began to pace, her mind racing, connecting dots she didn't want to see. The quiet demeanor, the comment the nurse had overheard, "No one should have to go through that alone." It sounded like something he might say. She stopped, her decision made. She snatched her phone from the table and dialed Fletcher, her heart pounding with a mixture of dread and a strange, wild hope. He answered immediately. "Miss Kincaid?" "Forget the broad search," she said, her voice a low, urgent command. "I have a name. Elias Grand. He's one of our night janitors. He works the executive floors." There was a moment of surprised silence on the other end. "A janitor, ma'am." "Find out everything, Fletcher. His employee file, his family status, his medical history if you can get it. I want to know where he was the week of my surgery. And, Fletcher." "Yes, ma'am." "Be invisible." Elias felt like he was being watched. It was a prickling sensation on the back of his neck, a feeling that had started the night after his conversation with Harper. He was probably just being paranoid, his secret making him jump at shadows. He became even more meticulous, more withdrawn, at work. He took his breaks in a deserted stairwell instead of the staff room. He kept his head down, his gaze locked on the floor he was cleaning, never letting it drift up, terrified he might meet her eyes again. He just had to get through his shifts, collect his paycheck, and go home to Mia. That was the mantra that kept his fear at bay. It took Fletcher less than 48 hours. He was, as Harper knew, the best. He walked into her office and placed a thick gray folder on the polished surface of her desk. He didn't say a word, just stepped back, his hands clasped behind his back. Harper stared at the folder as if it were a bomb. Her hands trembled slightly as she reached out and opened it. The first page was a printout of Elias Grand's employee file. A standard photo taken on his first day stared up at her. It was him. His eyes were kind, but shadowed with a weariness she recognized. She scanned the details. Age 34. Start date 3 months ago. Emergency contact. Maya Grand, daughter. She turned the page. It was a short biography Fletcher had compiled from public records. Elias's wife, Chloe Grand, had died 3 years ago. Ovarian cancer, a long, brutal illness. Harper's breath caught in her throat. He had watched someone he loved die in a hospital. He knew what that loneliness felt like. The next page was a timeline. Fletcher had discreetly acquired the employee attendance logs. Elias Grand had been a model employee for his first 2 months. Perfect attendance. Then, a single, 1-week absence. The dates matched her surgery perfectly. The reason listed, approved medical leave. It was all there. The motive, the opportunity. But she needed the final, irrefutable proof. She flipped to the last page. It was a copy of his ID from his security clearance application. Next to it, Fletcher had typed a single line, an observation from the HR clerk who had processed his paperwork. Distinguishing marks, faded tattoo of a daisy on left wrist. Harper leaned back in her chair, the air leaving her lungs in a rush. The folder slipped from her fingers, its contents spilling across her desk. It was him. The ghost had a name. The ghost had a daughter. The ghost had a story of his own grief, and out of that grief, he had saved her life. He wasn't a phantom or a puzzle to be solved. He was a man. A single father who polished her floors, who ached with a pain he was trying to hide, who had given her a piece of himself for no reason other than simple, staggering kindness. The entire, carefully constructed world of her life, a world of logic and leverage and transactions, shattered into 1,000,000 pieces. She stared at the picture of the quiet, sad-eyed man who had shown her a kind of humanity she didn't know existed. The mystery was over, but the real, terrifying question was just beginning. What in the world was she supposed to do now? For 2 days, Harper did nothing. The gray folder with Elias Grand's life story sat in the locked top drawer of her desk, a silent, ticking bomb. Her mind, usually a seamless engine of logic and strategy, was at war with itself. The CEO and her drafted plans, a promotion to a high-paying, low-effort job, a trust fund for his daughter, a new house in a better neighborhood. All of it was neat, clean, and transactional. All of it felt profoundly wrong, like trying to pay for the sun with a credit card. It was an insult to the quiet dignity of the man in the photograph. The human part of her, the part that had been dormant for years, was terrified. What could she possibly say to him? "Thank you for saving my life while I was completely unaware you even existed." The words were hollow, absurd. The chasm between their worlds, between the woman who owned the building and the man who cleaned its floors, seemed unbridgeable. On the 3rd night she went on her walk, her purpose clear. She would find him. She would stand in front of him and say, something. She found him on the 45th floor, wiping down the windows of an empty office, his reflection moving in sync with his own. She slowed her steps, her heart beginning to hammer against her ribs. He hadn't seen her yet. She opened her mouth to speak his name, but no sound came out. The air was thick with the distance between them. He was a father, a widower, a man grieving. She was a billionaire who had forgotten how to speak to another human being without an agenda. She turned before he could see her and fled back to the elevator, her cheeks burning with a shame she couldn't name. Back in her office, defeated, she pulled the folder from her drawer. She needed a new strategy. Her eyes scanned the pages again, past the details of his wife's death, past the timeline of his employment. She stopped at a medical summary Fletcher had managed to acquire. Mia Grand, age 7. Diagnosis: chronic severe asthma. Multiple hospitalizations for acute respiratory distress. That was it. That was the entry point. Not his grief, not his finances, but his daughter, his reason for everything. A child's health was a universal language, a vulnerability that transcended boardrooms and balance sheets. She couldn't approach him as a grateful billionaire, but maybe she could approach him as a person concerned about a little girl. The following Saturday, Kincaid Innovations was the primary sponsor of a citywide community health and wellness fair in the largest public park. It was a PR event, something Harper usually sent a subordinate to. But this time she informed her team she would be attending herself. The park was teeming with life. Families picnicked on the grass, children shrieked with laughter in a bounce house, and locals milled around the various tents offering free health screenings and fitness demonstrations. Elias was there with Mia. It was his first real day off since the surgery, where he felt strong enough to do something special with her. She was ecstatic, her face painted like a butterfly, a half-eaten cone of cotton candy clutched in her sticky hand. For a few hours, Elias forgot about the ache in his side and the secret in his heart. He was just a dad, watching his daughter be a kid. They were sitting on a bench near the duck pond when it happened. Mia started coughing, a dry, tight little bark that Elias knew all too well. Her laughter turned into a wheeze, her eyes growing wide with the familiar panic. "Okay, sweetie, easy breaths," Elias said, his own heart starting to race. He pulled her onto his lap, reaching into his backpack for her emergency inhaler. Just like we practiced. In and out. Nice and slow, but the wheezing grew louder, more strained. A small crowd of people nearby began to look over with concern. Elias's hands started to shake as he tried to administer the inhaler. "Is your daughter all right?" a calm, low voice asked from beside him. Elias looked up, startled, and his blood ran cold. It was Harper Kincaid. She was dressed down in tailored slacks and a simple blouse, but she was unmistakable. She wasn't looking at him like a CEO. Her eyes, filled with a focus that was both intense and genuinely concerned, were on Mia. She has asthma," Elias stammered, his mind reeling. "It's an attack." "I can see that," Harper said, kneeling down so she was at eye level with Mia. "Hello there. My name is Harper." She didn't try to touch Mia, just kept her voice soft and even. "I know how terrifying asthma can be when you can't catch your breath. Just try to listen to your daddy." Elias stared at her. I know how terrifying asthma can be. How could she possibly know that? As Mia, soothed by the calm new voice, finally managed to take a proper dose from the inhaler, her ragged wheezing began to soften. Harper stood up. "There's a paramedic tent by the main stage. They can give her oxygen if you think she needs it." I think she's going to be okay," Elias said, relief washing over him as Mia's breathing evened out. He looked at Harper, bewildered. "Thank you." "Of course," she said. She gave a small, almost hesitant smile. It was the first time he had ever seen her smile. It changed her entire face. "She's a beautiful little girl. Is that a daisy on her shirt?" Elias looked down. Mia was wearing her favorite t-shirt, the one with a big, cartoonish daisy on the front. He nodded numbly. "It's her favorite flower." "I can see why," Harper said softly, her eyes meeting his for a brief, charged moment. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she gave a final nod. "I hope she feels better." She turned and walked away, melting back into the crowd. Elias sat on the bench, holding his daughter, his mind a complete blank. Harper Kincaid, the untouchable billionaire, had just knelt in the grass to help his daughter through an asthma attack. Nothing made sense anymore. The encounter in the park left Elias deeply unsettled. He replayed it in his mind a dozen times as he went about his shift that night. The memory a strange, warm spot in the cold, sterile environment of the corporate tower. Harper Kincaid, a woman he had mentally filed away as a remote, untouchable figure of immense power, had knelt on the grass for his daughter. She had spoken with a kindness that felt completely at odds with the ruthless reputation that preceded her. He didn't know what to make of it. It was a glitch in the matrix of his carefully ordered world, a puzzle he couldn't solve. So he did what he always did. He put his head down and focused on his work. For Harper, the encounter was a victory. She had crossed the chasm. She had spoken to him not as a CEO to a janitor, but as one human to another. The memory of Mia's small hand in his, of his gentle, calming voice, solidified her resolve. A check, a promotion, those were insults. What this man deserved was security, respect, and a life free from the constant worry she saw etched around his eyes. But how to give him that without revealing her hand, without making him feel like a charity case? The answer, ironically, was provided by her newest corporate rival. His name was Beckett Rowe, an ambitious executive vice president with cold eyes and a predatory smile. He saw Harper's recent, more hands-on approach and her apparent lack of focus on quarterly projections as a weakness. In a board meeting, he presented a new efficiency and optimization proposal. It was a sleek, data-driven plan to cut departmental budgets across the board, with the largest cuts aimed squarely at non-essential departments like facilities management. It would save the company $7 million a year, Beckett concluded, his gaze sweeping the room. A necessary trim of the fat. Harper looked at the numbers on the screen. She saw past the corporate jargon. Trimming the fat meant laying off dozens of people. People like Elias, the quiet, invisible army that kept her kingdom running. Before her surgery, she might have approved it. But now, all she could see was Elias's face, his worry for his daughter. "The proposal is rejected, Beckett," she said, her voice cutting through the room with an authority that left no room for argument. "We are not balancing our books on the backs of our most loyal employees." The stunned silence that followed was immensely satisfying, but the incident gave her an idea, a legitimate corporate reason to draw Elias into her orbit. The next day, an official memo went out. The CEO would be holding a series of focus groups with employees from various departments to better understand their roles and challenges. The night shift janitorial staff was scheduled for the following evening. Attendance was mandatory. When Elias saw the memo, a familiar dread washed over him. He would be in a room with her again. Not by chance in a park, but in a formal meeting. He spent the entire day on edge. The focus group was held in a gleaming conference room on the 50th floor. Elias and a dozen other janitors sat awkwardly around a massive oak table, looking out of place in their work uniforms. Harper entered, flanked by Beckett Rowe, who looked furious at being forced to attend. Harper was all business, her tone crisp and professional. She asked questions about their equipment, their schedules, the challenges they faced. Then, her eyes landed on Elias. "Mr. Grand," she said, and he felt every other person at the table turn to look at him. "You've been with us for a few months now. From your perspective, what is the one thing we could do to make your job more effective?" Elias felt his throat go dry. He could feel Beckett's dismissive stare. He thought for a moment, not about corporate efficiency, but about the truth. "Better lighting in the service stairwells, ma'am," he said, his voice quiet but clear. "A few of the bulbs have been out for weeks. It's a safety issue. Someone could fall." The answer was so simple, so practical, so completely devoid of corporate fluff that it silenced the room. Beckett scoffed, but Harper just nodded slowly, a thoughtful expression on her face. "Thank you, Elias. That's a very valid point." When the meeting concluded and the other janitors were filing out, buzzing with gossip, Harper's voice cut through the noise. "Elias, could you stay for a moment?" He froze, his heart sinking. The others cast him curious, pitying glances as they left. The heavy door clicked shut, leaving the two of them alone in the vast, silent room, the city light spread out behind her like a diamond net. "Please sit," she said, gesturing to the chair beside her. He did, perching on the edge of the expensive leather. She looked at him, her expression serious. "I wanted you to know that I rejected Mr. Rowe's proposal. Your jobs are safe." Elias blinked, surprised. "Thank you, Miss Kincaid. We appreciate that." "It was the right thing to do," she said. She paused, her gaze softening. "My perspective on things has changed recently, since my illness. You realize what's actually important?" She leaned forward slightly, her eyes searching his. "It's amazing how one person's simple act of kindness can change a person's entire world." Elias's heart began to pound. He stared back at her, his mind racing. She couldn't know. It was impossible. "Fletcher's report mentioned your wife," Harper said, her voice dropping to an almost whisper. The name Fletcher meant nothing to him, but the next words knocked the air from his lungs. "Chloe. I was so sorry to learn of her passing. I understand she was sick for a very long time. Elias stared at her, his blood turning to ice. The friendly boss from the park. The concerned CIO from the meeting. It was all an act. She hadn't just bumped into him. She had been investigating him. She knew his wife's name. She knew everything. The question hung in the air, sharp and accusatory. "How do you know my wife's name?" Elias was no longer the timid employee. His grief was a sacred, private thing, and she had trespassed on it. He was on his feet now, his hands clenched at his sides. Harper stood as well, her carefully constructed composure crumbling. She didn't try to lie or evade. She owed him the truth. "Because I've been looking for you," she said, her voice trembling slightly. "Ever since I woke up from my surgery, I've been looking for the man who saved my life." Elias stared at her, his anger faltering, replaced by a dawning, horrified understanding. "What are you talking about?" "The anonymous donor," she continued, her words coming in a rush. "The ghost my security team couldn't find. The one who told a nurse he was donating because no one should go through that alone. The one who left a single, maddening clue." She took a step closer, her eyes locked on his. "The doodle on the consent form was a daisy, Elias. The drawing in your cart was a field of daisies. Your tattoo, it was you, wasn't it?" The fight went out of him. He sank back into the chair, the denial he had been prepared to offer dying on his lips. All the fear, the secrecy, the constant, gnawing anxiety of the past month collapsed under the weight of her certainty. He could only nod, a single, defeated gesture. "Yes," he whispered. The confession, as quiet as it was, seemed to shake the very foundations of the room. Harper let out a breath she seemed to have been holding for weeks, her shoulders slumping. The formidable CEO vanished, replaced by someone raw and vulnerable. "Why?" she asked, her voice cracking. "I don't understand. You didn't know me. You could have died. You have a daughter. Why?" Elias looked up, and for the first time, he wasn't looking at Ms. Kincaid, the billionaire. He was looking at the lonely woman from Suite 7B. "Because I know what it's like to sit in a hospital room and watch the world fade away," he said, his voice thick with the memory of Chloe. "And I know what it's like to be the one left behind. I couldn't stand the thought of anyone else being that alone." That simple, honest answer broke through the last of her defenses. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in her eyes and spilled down her cheeks. The woman who never showed emotion in a boardroom was openly crying in front of her janitor. "You saved my life," she wept. The words a torrent of gratitude she had been holding back for weeks. "A stranger. You gave me a piece of yourself, and I didn't even know your name. I don't know how to thank you. I don't know what to do." Elias, stunned by her tears, felt a profound shift in the room. He was no longer the one at a disadvantage. He was the one who held all the power of a gift freely given. "You don't have to do anything," he said softly. "Just live. That's thanks enough." Meanwhile, on another floor, Beckett Rowe was conducting his own, far more malicious investigation. Furious at being publicly overruled, he was convinced Harper's bizarre interest in a janitor was a sign of a deeper instability, an Achilles heel he could exploit. He had his assistant pull Elias Grand's employee file. He scanned the pages, his eyes narrowing. Widower, young daughter, and a 1-week medical leave, taken just after Harper's own highly publicized return to the office. The timing was too perfect. Beckett's mind, always looking for the most cynical angle, began to spin a narrative. A secret, illicit affair. A lowly employee blackmailing a vulnerable, recently ill CEO. The focus group, the private meeting. It all clicked into place as damning evidence. He wouldn't know the truth about the kidney, but he didn't need to. The story he was crafting was far more scandalous and, for his purposes, far more effective. Back on the 50th floor, the emotional storm had passed. A fragile, Uncertain silence settled between Harper and Elias. The secret was out, a shared truth that bound them together in a way neither of them understood. "Your job," Harper began, her voice still shaky. "The foundation I mentioned, I can give you and Mia a new life. Anything you want." "Harper," Elias said, using her first name without thinking. It felt strangely natural. "I don't want anything. I just wanted my old life back. To be a dad, to be invisible." "You can't be," she whispered. "Not to me. Not anymore." The air was thick with unspoken possibilities. As they stood there, navigating the first moments of this new, terrifying reality, Harper's desktop computer chimed with an incoming email notification. She glanced at the screen, her brow furrowing. It was a calendar alert, flagged as urgent. "Emergency meeting of the Board of Directors, convened by Beckett Rowe." The subject line was a declaration of war, a formal review of CEO Harper Kincaid's leadership, recent conduct, and fitness to serve. Her blood ran cold. She looked from the screen to Elias, who had seen the color drain from her face. He was the reason. She had shown a moment of humanity, of connection, and now the sharks were circling, smelling blood in the water. "What is it?" he asked, seeing the look on her face. She turned the monitor toward him. He read the words, his own face hardening. The battle for Harper's life was over, but the battle for her company and for both of their futures was just about to begin. A cold, hard fury rose in Harper, eclipsing her fear. For years she had fought and won battles in this boardroom. She had dismantled rivals, negotiated impossible deals, and built an empire through sheer force of will. She would not be brought down by a lie, not now, not when she had just been given a second chance at life. She looked at Elias. He was pale, his eyes wide with the shock of being pulled into this corporate vortex. He was a good man who had wanted nothing more than to be left alone, and now his quiet life was about to be weaponized against her. "He's going to twist it," she said, her voice a low, dangerous hum. "He'll paint a picture of an affair, of blackmail. He'll call me unstable, and he'll use you, your medical leave, our conversations, as his proof." Elias looked from the email to her face, a new resolve hardening his features. The fear was still there, but it was being replaced by a quiet indignation. "He's wrong," he said simply. "I know," Harper replied. "But in that room, the truth is whatever the board decides it is, unless we give them a better one." A plan began to form in her mind, a high-stakes gamble that would either save them both or lead to their mutual destruction. "He thinks you're my weakness, Elias. But he's wrong. You're my trump card." The boardroom was a theater of corporate warfare. The long, polished table reflected the grim faces of the 12 board members. Beckett Rowe stood at its head, a master puppeteer delivering a flawless performance. He presented his case with chilling precision, laying out a timeline of Harper's erratic behavior since her return from medical leave. He spoke of her canceled meetings, her aimless nightly wanderings, and her unhealthy fixation on a low-level employee. "She held a private, undocumented meeting with this man, Elias Grand," Beckett said, his voice dripping with insinuation. Shortly thereafter, a proposal to streamline his department was summarily rejected. This janitor, who conveniently took a medical leave of his own at the same time as Ms. Kincaid, now seems to hold an inappropriate level of influence over our CEO. I submit that her judgment is compromised. Her leadership is a liability this company can no longer afford. The board members murmured amongst themselves, their expressions a mixture of shock and concern. They looked at Harper, waiting for a defense. Harper rose slowly, her gaze sweeping across the faces of the people who held her fate in their hands. "Mr. Rowe is right about one thing," she began, her voice steady and clear. "My judgment has changed. My perspective has changed. This company has been my entire life, but a month ago, I was reminded that life itself is a fragile thing. I was dying." She let the words hang in the air, And he is also right that my change in perspective has everything to do with one man. She looked toward the boardroom doors. A man I believe you should all meet. On cue, the doors opened. Elias Grand walked in. He was wearing his simple work uniform, and in the opulent, wood-paneled room, he looked profoundly out of place, and yet completely self-possessed. A wave of stunned whispers rippled through the room. Beckett smirked, a look of triumph on his face. This was it, the final nail in her coffin. "This is Elias Grand," Harper said, her voice ringing with a pride that stunned them all. "And Mr. Rowe is right. We have a connection that has deeply affected my leadership. Because a month ago, when my life was ending, and I had no one, this man, a stranger who knew me only as a name on a building, saved my life. He gave me his kidney. The silence that followed was absolute. A thick, heavy blanket of pure shock." Beckett's smirk vanished, his face slackening in disbelief. Harper gestured for Elias to speak. He stepped forward, his eyes not on the powerful board members, but on Harper. "I'm not a businessman," he said, his voice simple and direct. "I don't know about profits or projections, but I know what it's like to lose someone. And I know that what makes a person, or a company, strong isn't just the money it makes, it's the people. It's how you treat them. I saw a person who was alone and needed help, so I helped." That's all. He looked at Beckett, his gaze unwavering. "You see Ms. Kincaid's compassion as a weakness. I see it as a strength. And I think that's the kind of person who should be running this company." His words, so honest and unadorned, were more powerful than any corporate presentation. They cut through the cynicism and exposed Beckett's plot for what it was, a petty, soulless power grab. The truth, in its staggering, unbelievable simplicity, had obliterated the lie. The vote was unanimous. Beckett Rowe was removed from his position, effective immediately. Months later, the autumn sun cast long shadows across the park. The scandal had faded, replaced by a legend whispered in the halls of Kincaid Innovations, the story of the CEO and the janitor. Harper, with the full backing of her board, had established the Chloe Grand Foundation for Employee Wellness, a multi-million-dollar initiative to support company staff and their families through medical crises. Its director, Elias Grand, now wore a simple blazer instead of a janitor's uniform, but his office was modest, and he still went home every day at 5 to be with his daughter. Harper found him by the swings, where he was pushing a laughing, squealing Mia higher and higher. The haunted look was gone from his eyes, replaced by a deep, quiet contentment. "Higher, Daddy, higher!" Mia shrieked. "Careful, you'll fly into orbit," Harper said, smiling as she came to a stop beside Elias. He stopped pushing, resting his hand gently on her shoulder, a simple, comfortable gesture that spoke volumes. "She's got a good engine on her." "She gets it from her father," Harper said softly, her eyes meeting his. The loneliness was gone. The silence in her penthouse was no longer a tomb, but a quiet space waiting to be filled with the sound of Mia's laughter. The invisible man was now the most visible person in her life. Together, they watched the little girl in the Daisy t-shirt soar towards the sky, two people from different worlds, bound by a single, selfless act that had saved them both. They had found something far more valuable than a company or a fortune. They had found a family. Thank you for letting me share that story with you. I'm always curious. After the silence settles, what's the one thought or feeling that's staying with you? There's no right or wrong answer, of course. I just find that sharing those little echoes is what makes these stories truly come alive. Feel free to leave your thought in the comments below, and if you'd like to explore more worlds like this one together, make sure you're subscribed with the notification bell turned on. There are so many more journeys to take. For now, thank you for your time and your imagination. It means the world. I'll see you in the next chapter.